I think, therefore I am, or in its original Latin form, cogito ergo sum. What does that actually mean? A long time ago, 1837 to be exact, French philosopher and mathematician named René Descartes, also known as the father of modern philosophy, coined that phrase. And after a few centuries, what we are left with are the countless internet memes about this proposition. There are memes like, I think, therefore I can't sleep, or jokes like Descartes when he realized that people who don't think also exist. So, is this just a factual statement dressed up in clever philosophical language? Is it something we all know, but because Descartes said it in Latin, it sounds profound? Or is there something deeper behind this quote that we are missing? As we will see soon, Descartes is not making a casual observation about human existence. He is answering a very specific and very extreme question. What can be known with absolute certainty if everything else is put into doubt? What if your senses deceive you? What if you are dreaming right now? What is the distinction between dream and real life, if there is any? What if you are being systematically misled by a powerful intelligence, an evil spirit, or in modern terms, something like a simulation built by aliens? My purpose in this episode is to unpack this famous phrase and see what it is doing instead of mocking it or quoting it out of context. I will do so by analyzing and summarizing the first two meditations of Descartes' book, the Meditations on First Philosophy, trying to stay faithful to the arguments laid out by Descartes, while also presenting it in more accessible language. So first, let's start with the mood and methodology that Descartes sets in the first meditation. In one of the letters to his friends, he makes it clear that he is not casually questioning things for the sake of questioning them or for the sake of becoming a skeptic. Descartes writes, "Throughout the next 9 years, I did nothing but roam about in the world, trying to be a spectator rather than an actor in all the comedies that are played out there, reflecting especially upon the points in every subject which might make it suspect and give occasion for us to make mistakes. I kept uprooting from my mind any errors that might previously have stepped into it. In doing this, I was not copying the skeptics who doubt only for the sake of doubting and pretend to be always undecided. On the contrary, my whole aim was to reach certainty, to cast aside the loose earth and sand so as to come upon rock or clay. So the whole idea is to question things so as to come to some conclusion about certain facts about the world. He has reached a breaking point, sees the flaws and cracks in the world of science and philosophy, which heavily relied on the marriage between Aristotelian metaphysics and traditional Abrahamic religions for centuries. He opens the meditations by admitting something uncomfortable. Most of what he believes he accepted far too early in his life, but luckily it is not too late to challenge them. Beliefs from childhood, inherited assumptions about how the world works, common sense approach to physics and science, things he accepted before he had the tools and mental capacity to question them. And once those beliefs were in place, everything else that he knew about the world was built on top of those foundations. This includes private life, dating life, careers, sciences, explanations of the world, and any existing scientific theory out there. All of it resting on foundations he now suspects are unstable, or rather that he wants to demolish. So he decides something radical. His aim is not to renovate existing ideas or to correct them, but to demolish the entire structure and rebuild from the ground up. And notice the discipline here. As he writes in the meditations, I realized that if I wanted to establish anything in the sciences that was stable and likely to last, I needed just once in my life to demolish everything completely and start again right from the foundations. So he doesn't do this impulsively. He creates what he calls untroubled leisure. That is already a philosophical act because Descartes is saying If you want truth, you cannot pursue it casually. You need solitude, free time, focus, and a willingness to destroy what feels familiar. And that's where the meditation starts. The idea is to get rid of all your previously held judgments, biases, however common sense they might seem at first. Now, here's the key move. He says he does not need to prove all his beliefs are false. That would be impossible task. Instead, he adopts one single and very strict rule. If a belief is not absolutely certain, he will treat it as if it were false. So this is very important to understand here. So what it means in practice is that if there is any single doubt about something, he is going to reject it. So the question he's asking is not, is this probably true? Or can we accept a conclusion with some margin of error? Or that should we be satisfied with more certain of two existing probabilities? He is asking, is this absolutely certain? Anything less than yes as an answer to that question will get suspended and flagged as false. He is looking for something that he can 100% rely on as a truth. And if senses, sight, smell, taste, touch, cannot provide that, then they also have to go. I think this approach can be best summarized by the passage that he has in the first meditation. Certainly, up to now, whatever I have accepted as fully true, I have learned either from or by means of the senses. But I have discovered that they sometimes deceive us, and prudence dictates that we should never fully trust those who have deceived us even once. I think Descartes certainly touches upon something very real about senses deceiving us, as we can illustrate this fact using modern examples of our everyday lives. Through these examples, this idea will become more clear. So let's say you're walking at night, you see something dark on the road ahead. For a second, it looks like a stranger that you cannot recognize is standing there. So your body reacts before your mind does. Heart rate is up, slight tension, but then you get closer. Then you realize that it was just a shadow, or maybe a trash bag or a post. So this is one possible example that Descartes would point to as senses deceiving us. In that specific example, even though your body trusts your senses as evidenced by your heart rate going up, your reason tells you to suspend your judgment until you are sure what it is. That conflict between senses and reason, and which one are you going to rely on, is central to Descartes' understanding. Another example, think about sitting in an airplane during takeoff. So the plane accelerates, your body is pressed into the seat. For a brief moment, it feels very unstable, almost as if you are losing control over your body. What is happening is that your senses, every cell in your body, are sending alarm signals. But at the same time, reason tells you that this is normal and you should not panic. If you reason even further, you realize that thousands of flights take off safely every day and that you should not trust your senses by sounding all those alarms. Nothing dangerous is actually happening. What is happening here is that your senses are not really tricking you. They are just doing what they evolved to do, but they are not reliable guides to truth at this moment. Final example. Let's say you put a straight stick into water. It looks bent. You know it's not bent, but your eyes keep insisting that it is. So in both cases, the senses present information, but you correct your senses if you are able to use your reason or intellect. So which deserves your absolute trust in this scenario? The senses or the reason? For Descartes, these examples obviously demonstrate that your reason is more trustworthy than your senses. Descartes says that if a source of knowledge deceives you even once, in this case our senses, it can never be the foundation of absolute certainty. To make this process of doubting manageable, Descartes doesn't examine beliefs one by one, such as stick in the water or fog or something else. He attacks the foundations, because if the foundation collapses, everything built on it collapses automatically. So, where do most of our beliefs come from? The senses, sight, touch, hearing, smell, and Descartes makes a very modest claim here. He doesn't say that senses always deceive us. He says they sometimes deceive us, and that is enough to disregard them as the foundation of certainty. If something has deceived you even once, prudence says you should never trust it completely. Obviously, if senses deceived us all the time, we would not be able to survive in this world. But he's saying sometimes they deceive us, and that's enough. But then we are presented with the counter argument that Descartes himself presents. Okay, fine, maybe the senses deceive us about distance or distant or small things, but what about obvious facts that we know of? I am meditating right now near the fire in my room, that I'm sitting here, that I have hands, that I'm holding a paper, holding a pen, that I'm by the fire, wearing clothes. Surely this cannot be doubted. And Descartes says, normally no, but for a moment, consider dreams. When you dream, you experience the same kinds of sensations. You see, you touch, you feel warmed, you speak, you move, you make sense. And while dreaming, you are convinced that it is real. Only later, after you wake up, do you realize it wasn't real. So how do you know right now that you are not dreaming? Descartes examines the usual tests: clarity, vividness, awareness, control. There is really no definitive sign that distinguishes waking from dreaming. Any test you propose has already appeared in dreams. He writes, when I think about this more carefully, I see so clearly that I can never distinguish by reliable signs being awake from being asleep, that I'm confused, and this feeling of confusion almost confirms me in believing that I am asleep. If I could be dreaming right now, then everything derived from my senses becomes uncertain. My body, my surroundings, the external world itself. But then he says, hold on a second. Even in dreams, things can't be created from nothing. Dreams recombine elements of reality, like painters imagining mythical creatures by combining parts of animals they have seen before. So perhaps complex things can be doubted, but simple elements such as shapes, numbers, extension, quantity, and time remain. Because regardless of whether you are awake or asleep, 2 plus 3 still equals 5. A square still has 4 sides. And this leads him to a tentative conclusion, not a final conclusion. The sciences that deal with composite things such as physics, medicine, astronomy can be doubtful. But disciplines dealing with simple, abstract truths such as arithmetic and geometry seem safe for now, at least for now. And then Descartes drops the real bomb. He introduces a belief he has long held, that there exists an all-powerful God who created him. Then the next question is, what if this supreme being called God has created me in such a way that I am always mistaken? What if even my most basic reasoning is unreliable? What if every time I add numbers or recognize shapes or reason logically, I am being deceived? So our previous conclusion about arithmetic or geometry seemingly being real collapses under this argument. Now, Descartes hesitates here. He admits that a perfectly good God deceiving him constantly seems incompatible with the idea of divine goodness. But even this hesitation doesn't save certainty, because God still allows error. We know that much. And if someone rejects God entirely, things get even more complicated. They don't get simple. Because if I am the product of blind chance or an imperfect cause, then it becomes even more likely that my faculties are flawed, even more flawed than before, that they are not perfectly built by this supreme being. Either way, certainty has collapsed again. There is nothing he once believed that cannot be legitimately doubted. Nothing, because reason simply demands him to doubt them all. But there is a psychological problem here. Old beliefs don't disappear just because we've argued against them. They creep back. Habit pulls us toward what feels familiar. Probability tempts us to ascend even when certainty is missing. But as a devout, religious, and Catholic man, Descartes cannot stomach the idea of a good God being a liar. So to keep the experiment going, he invents a new character. He imagines an evil spirit or demon that is supremely powerful, supremely cunning, entirely devoted to deceiving him with this apparently fake reality. Satan like figure. This being manipulates his senses, his thoughts, his reasoning, his entire experience of reality. Under this assumption, the sky, the earth, the sun, sounds, bodies, even his own hands might be illusions. If you prefer a slightly modern interpretation of this idea, this is as close as it gets to the modern idea of simulation theory, that we are living inside a simulation created by an agent more powerful than us, perhaps aliens or future superhumans or superintelligent AI, and that we are simply NPCs. Descartes strips himself of everything: no body, no senses, no external world, only the determination not to assent to anything false. And here, Descartes ends the first meditation with exhaustion. He compares himself to a prisoner who dreams of freedom and resists waking up. And that's how first meditation ends, with utter confusion and agony where we haven't reached any resolution. We have only successfully dismantled the old scientific and philosophical world, but we don't have any foundation to cling into just yet. I hope you are finding this episode interesting, and if so, please subscribe or follow on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts to get notified about the future episodes. Please also leave a like on YouTube or a review on Spotify, as this helps the show reach more people. Now back to the episode. The second meditation opens with a bit of a hangover of doubt. Descartes is reflecting on the destruction and nightmare of the previous night. So if we follow the logic, it seems like he wrote these meditations as kind of a journal entry every night. So yesterday's doubt hasn't been resolved. If anything, it has tightened its grip on Descartes' mind. Everything that could be doubted has been treated as false, and nothing solid has shown itself just yet. So the task isn't to break out of doubt or slow down this process. In fact, it is to keep going with it. We are going to double down on our doubts even further, carefully, until anything, refuses to collapse. The rule stays the same. Discard whatever leaves room for even the slightest doubt. So imagine the worst case. Everything the senses report is false. Memory is unreliable. There are no bodies, no space, no extension, no movement, no place. Even arithmetic and geometry are under suspect. Under that pressure, what is left? At first, it feels like the answer is nothing. Maybe the only thing you can say with confidence is that confidence is impossible. But even that is kind of a move, a contradiction, paradox. To say nothing is certain is already to be doing something. Because when you say that everything is false, who is doing what that's saying? And what does that even mean? It can't just be a blank silence. The concept of nothingness or 100% falseness is not simply darkness. Because when you talk about darkness or emptiness, you still imply that empty space exists. And once that is noticed, a logical question forces itself into the conversation. Is there something that exists even if everything else is wrong? That is where things get very spicy and we come to the heart of the matter here. So if there is a deception, someone is being deceived. If there is doubt, someone is doubting. Even if a supremely powerful deceiver, evil spirit, is shaping every perception and steering every calculation into error, one thing cannot be removed. As long as the deception is happening, there is a subject for it to happen to. So the conclusion is obvious. I am, I exist. Or in original Latin form, ego sum, ego existo. Listen to exactly how Descartes phrases this legendary realization in the second meditation. There is some unidentified deceiver, however all-powerful and cunning, who is dedicated to deceiving me constantly. Therefore, it is indubitable that I also exist, if he deceives me, and let him deceive me as much as he wishes. he will still never bring it about that I am nothing, as long as I think I am something. Thus, having weighed up everything adequately, it must finally be stated that this proposition, I am, I exist, is necessarily true whenever it is stated by me or conceived in my mind. So let's take a pause here and a little bit talk about the history behind this phrase. Because as you see, we are not saying I think, therefore I exist, but we are saying I am, I exist. This phrase in the meditations is less known version of this other famous phrase, cogito ergo sum, or I think, therefore I am. That phrase first appears in an earlier book written in 1637 called Discourse on the Method. What we have in the meditations is I am, I exist, is a deliberately different, more strict, and less poetic way of stating the same basic insight inside the structure of this method of doubt in meditations. I think, therefore, I am reads more like a short argument from one premise, I think, to a conclusion, I am, or I exist. Whereas I am, I exist is presented as an immediately evident intuition that cannot be doubted whenever it is entertained. The emphasis here in meditations is more on the self evident nature of this reality after rationalization rather than logical statement. Okay, enough about the history of the term, and now let's go back to the book. The certainty here comes from the impossibility of separating existence from the act of thinking. Thinking can't occur in a vacuum. To think is already to be. So after you read this passage, you almost see in the text Descartes getting relaxed because he finally comes to some sort of thing that he accepts as real. Okay, that secures existence, but it doesn't tell us what exists. And that question comes next. What am I in that proposition of I am, I exist? This is where it gets tricky. Before the doubt began in the first meditation, the reply would have been automatic. A human being, a body, or a political animal, as Aristotle phrased it in his Politics. But those definitions lean on the very things that have been placed in doubt just yesterday: bodies, senses, the physical world. So they are off limits for now. We cannot return to old habits that have deceived us in the past. The only honest strategy is subtraction. Start with the familiar picture of the self and remove whatever that cannot survive the method. The old self was a body with limbs located in space, capable of movement, nourishment, sensation. But all of that depends on bodies existing and on senses being trustworthy. Both are suspended as far as the first meditation is concerned. So none of it can define what this I is, because we're looking for 100% certainty, not probabilities. Okay, but what about the soul, imagined as some subtle stuff like air or fire? Turns out that that too borrows from bodily imagery. If you ever watched the cartoon and saw the soul, you know what I mean. It rides on imagination. It has to depart from the picture as well. So what remains has to be something that doesn't depend on senses, body, or imagination. Now the focus turns inward. Among everything that used to be attributed to the self, one activity cannot be peeled away. Thinking. Doubting is thinking. Understanding is thinking. Affirming and denying are thinking. Willing and refusing are thinking. Even imagining and seeming to perceive count, because regardless of whether what is imagined is real, the act of imagining still happens. So Descartes defines that I in that phrase of I am, I exist, a thinking thing. Nothing extra is added because extra would be guesswork, but nothing less will work either. Under radical doubt, this is what can be known with certainty. There is thinking, and therefore there is a thinker, and that thinker is a thinking thing. Okay, again, that this all sounds too theoretical and conceptual. What is that thinking thing that we cannot see, but we have arrived to as the only thing that is real? We confidently otherwise reject the body which we feel, but accept thinking thing as real, which we cannot see. Descartes here picks an ordinary object, a piece of wax. At first, it looks like the wax is defined by its sensory traits. It is smell, taste, color, shape, size, hardness, the sound it makes when struck. That all seems obvious. Then he holds it near a fire. What happens is that the smell fades, the taste disappears, the color shifts, the shape collapses, the hardness turns to liquid, the sound is gone. Everything the senses seem to give as the wax's identity changed completely. And yet we still say it is the same wax. So what was the wax really if none of those sensory features were essential for it to be wax? It can't be the smell or color or texture because those came and went. What remains is something extended, flexible, capable of change. But even that isn't captured by imagination because the range of possible shapes the wax can take is practically endless. You can't picture them all. So, what is it that holds the wax steady as one thing through every transformation that wax goes through? Not sight, not touch, not imagination, only the intellect. Your reasoning to understand all these changes. The senses give you shifting appearances. The mind supplies the judgment. This is one and the same thing persisting through change. Facts. The senses might prompt the judgment, but they don't contain it. This is very similar to the airplane argument that we talked about earlier. And once that clicks, the point expands. If even physical objects are grasped through intellectual judgments, then bodily things aren't clearer than the mind. They only seemed clearer because attention was misplaced. Look at the comparison straight on. If you think you know the wax because you see it or touch it, then you know yourself even more certainly, because seeing and touching are themselves modes of thinking. Even if the wax doesn't exist, even if there are no hands or eyes, the act of judging, there is wax, still confirms the existence of the judging mind. Every perception of an external thing presupposes the mind that perceives and judges. So the mind is known first and with more certainty and clarity than any body. This also explains an everyday linguistic illusion. We say we see the wax or we see people walking in the street, but what we actually see are colors and shapes. The recognition that we make to distinguish those colors and shapes, to differentiate between wax, person, or object, is a judgment the intellect makes on the basis of those appearances. So, in summary, the senses don't know objects, only the mind, the thinking substance, powered by reason or intellect, does. None of this proves yet that bodies exist or what their ultimate nature is. That comes later. What has been secured here is more basic. Under the most extreme doubt imaginable, one thing holds. There is a thinking self, or as Descartes calls it, a thinking thing. And more than that, this self is known more certainly and more distinctly than anything delivered by the senses. So at this point, we come to the end of second meditation, and with that, Descartes' exercise of extreme doubt comes to a pause because a foundation has finally been found, a foundation where the rest of the sciences and philosophy can be rebuilt. And from that point, reconstruction can begin. Next time, that is the third meditation, we will ask whether this thinking thing can ever escape itself and reach the world again, and talk about Descartes' arguments regarding the existence of God and immortality of the mind, and the famous distinction between mind and body. Thank you for listening or watching. If you want to stay updated on future episodes, you can follow the show on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. Please also consider leaving a like on YouTube or a review on Spotify, as this helps the show reach a lot of people. You can also leave comments if you have any personal thoughts on the topics discussed during the episodes. More conversations and solo episodes are on the way in the following weeks, and following the show is the best way to be notified about them. If you would like to reach out to me directly, you can DM me on Instagram at philosophy.everyday. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.